In this video, let's talk about when you have an adult child moving back home with you. That's something that my husband and I experienced a couple of years ago when our 30-year-old son moved back in with us. And let's talk about how you are trying to parent with faith, and therefore you are seeking the purpose and the opportunities within that season that you're in, and also what kind of generational healing and other aspects maybe are in store for you. Because all I can tell you is that in our experience, when our son came home, it really was about God giving us a chance to build stronger bonds, to heal some emotional separation that had been there, and to establish patterns of relating with each other that I think we all needed. It was just my husband, myself, and our 30-year-old son at the time. And yes, did it sometimes feel and look like failure? Like, he felt that way, like coming home, going back to live with my mommy and daddy, right? And then even for us as parents, because I've seen the things like Dave Ramsey's quote that says, teach your kids to work and manage money, or they'll be 30 years old and living in your basement. And there I was, we were inviting our 30-year-old to come back and stay for a while. So it can look like failure, but really and truly, I believe when we're parenting with faith, we're going to find where the blessings are, and we're going to see how God is helping us to restore balance and helping us to find a deeper connection within ourselves and God, within our child and God, and then also between each other or amongst each other. So I think if you're in a season of, your adult child returning home, I hope that this video will just help you to take a growth perspective and cultivate a growth narrative as, you spend those months or years with your child living at home, and also consider how you can deepen your bonds through the experience, true connection, communicating, that sort of thing. And I hope that this video will also give you some encouragement and some tips for how you can navigate these times intentionally and being mindful about seeking balance and believing and having the faith that you actually are on the right track, even in times like that. So let's dive in. This is the Balance Journey, where we're all about turning challenges into growth opportunities and bringing mindfulness to everyday life. So let me just start by giving you the backstory. Our firstborn was 18 years old and pretty much said, I need to move out. I've got to live my own life and do things my way. And, we had said, well, we're not going to pay for that. We hope that you are getting ready to have a job and so forth. And he definitely had always been a hard worker and so forth. So he found a way to move in with roommates, and he kept his bills paid and so forth. But from the age of 18 through the age of 30, while he was very much in our lives and we were in his, he was kind of letting us know, I'm going to take care of things, right? So watching that process, I felt it looked very messy. I sometimes would be like, wow, did you comb your hair? When I would see him, and, you still feel like the mother bear, and you want to keep molding this person. And yet he was fending for himself, and we respected that, and he was figuring life out. And so just like any of us mothers, we're still seeing our little boy, even though to him, I'm a grown man, and I'm handling my life. So I was seeing him as a little boy and trying my best to not treat him like one, but at the same time, watching his stumbles and his starts and his stops in relationships and in choices that he was making. Those things are hard no matter what the situation is, even if they're still living at home with us. But he was living on his own, and we didn't have that opportunity where, he would come back into the fold and we could feel like, he's still getting this sense of his groundedness and his sense of his values. He had those values and he was living those values. In fact, it almost did him a disservice because he was so willing to be of service and to be of help to other people that, it financially depleted his accounts, and he just had to learn the hard way about some things that everybody learns, But watching that and wishing, like somehow we could have been more able to protect him from it, that was a really hard thing. So I had been really working throughout that period of time on just learning to let go, learning to say, God, I now understand what it means to give my child to you, kind of like how Abraham, was willing to sacrifice his son. I mean, this idea that I don't really have any say, and I'm watching this and I'm just wanting something different, but I'm really wanting to parent with faith, and I am giving my son to you and just saying, God, please hold him, please have him. And so that period of time before he came home was a period of really already learning to really see my son differently and learn that I can feel uncomfortable about how it's going, but I have to trust and I have to have faith. And I just kept choosing to bring my worries to Spirit, and every time saying, this is what I'm worried about. It doesn't look good. I don't like what he's choosing, or something like that. So that's the backstory. And while that's where he was at various times, it wasn't the stream of, every moment throughout his age 18 to age 30. But as I had been developing that deeper trust and, doing my best to always, both my husband and I, be available, to be the steadiness, to let him know, this is here, and we're continuing to be that presence and that steadiness for him. He continued to grow until he broke up with his girlfriend, and we said, if you're not going to be staying and you need a place, come home. So depending on your situation, if your child is coming home and, it does look messy, or you aren't too sure about, the choices they've been making or something, I just first of all want to encourage you, it's important to obviously set some boundaries and get on the same page with your spouse about what the expectations are going to be about your adult child. And they are coming into your space, and you can set the tone. It's important that we do. We have to do that for their stability, their sense of, okay, I understand the parameters here. And when we maintain clarity about that, and we maintain steadiness with that, then they can feel safe, and they can understand how they need to expand to fill the space that we're not just going to jump in and take care of for them, right? So there's that important aspect there, if that's what you're going through, to recognize that. And then the other aspect is, if you're seeing that it's something that you've also doubted, just like I was doubting, that you can really focus on that faithful parenting of, just continuing to seek within yourself and asking for Spirit's help in understanding what is the potential here, what is the opportunity we have, and what values do I need to keep bringing forward? What principles do I need to keep bringing forward? When you know what those are, it's not like you're trying to bring an agenda forward with your child, but in conversation and so forth, you can continue to reiterate those things. You can continue to almost remind them, because those things are part of their upbringing, I'm sure. I mean, was the upbringing for our son, and so when I was seeing it to be very, I was doubtful still, I had worked a lot on that between his 18 and being 30 years old. So it wasn't terrible by the time he came home. But I remember telling myself, God, I need to do better at not seeing all of his flaws. I need to do better at seeing his character, his integrity, his intentions. And I really need help with that. And as I would pray about that and really desire to stay open-minded and to just really pull those things, I would start to see the same stories he'd be telling me about what he had done at work and how he was trying to be a leader and so forth. And I would start to say, you know what? I mean, that's his integrity at work. That's his character, really trying to uphold something, even when it's frustrating him because, he doesn't see the progress, or he gets a lot of pushback from somebody else. So that's what we started to bring into the narrative, when we got to have this regularity of him coming home and kind of touching base because he was living under our roof for that period of time. And so being able to have those conversations, and just because I was being intentional there, I was really knowing this is important to me, that I want to bring that forward and I want to see more of that in my own way of viewing him. I would say, man, that really must have been a frustrating situation. But you know what I see? I really see how you were trying to show your integrity, how you were coming to the situation with integrity, and it's interesting. I would watch his eyes, and I think sometimes he didn't even realize it. And as I would tell him this, it would help him to see himself differently, to see himself maybe more the kind of person that he believes himself to be, but to believe him, that's really who I am, because we know what we intend, but we don't always believe it about ourselves, right? We're the worst at believing in ourselves. So this ability that we will have to, in parenting with faith, be seeking for the opportunities, to bring that groundedness and those values forward, to help our children maybe to return to their sense of balance, because we are holding that space and saying, I see you and I believe this is true about you. So that even when they see all this feedback from, work and whatever kind of interactions they're having, they're seeing this feedback that makes them think it's not true about me, then they can resettle themselves. And one of the things that he did share with me in close to the time that he was getting ready to move out again and go back on his own, he says, within this time that I was here, I was able to redevelop routines and the discipline to uphold them. He says that he, for the first time, wasn't worrying about carrying anybody else's burdens. And he just could focus on himself. And he says, I feel more accomplished during the time that I stayed here than I did for the last 10 years. And so I really do think that we did help him in cultivating this growth perspective and growth narrative, and asking for God's help to just keep seeing the brightness and the fullness of who he really is. We kept kind of bringing that back to him in conversation and so forth. That was a huge impact in him being able to say, I see myself as having accomplished really important things. So I just think that that's an encouragement, hopefully, in your scenario, because that is such a potential. And we play a big part as parents in how we want to faithfully bring that into our conversations. Obviously, it's harder to do if you're still struggling with getting your adult child to, just pay their bills and not be a burden to you. It's harder. You have to have set that first so that you can then have these more intentional conversations about subject matters that go beyond just those basics of paying your bills and so forth. So the first thing we looked at was really developing this growth narrative and perspective. But the second thing that I'm hoping this video can help with is to give you the understanding that there's so much potential in what God can do in healing generational wounds as well as restoring relationship. Now, in our case, my son had been in his formative years when my husband was deployed. And so, from about age 11 to 17, there were just long periods of time where his dad was not in the picture on the daily basis. And he was not given that same opportunity just by the way it was of his life. He wasn't given that opportunity that his two younger brothers definitely got, because by the time they were in that phase of life, their dad was home and no longer being deployed. So when I think about things like that, only now, I didn't realize it at the time, but when I saw, and I kept asking for God to help me see how there are opportunities here for deepening bonds in my son being home with us again, I saw God restoring a relationship that wasn't broken. Luckily, there was nothing wrong with this relationship between his dad and my son. But at the same time, it was restoring all of those lost moments, So my son would come home, and my husband's a person who likes to mess around and, tickle and just engage in that way. And when I would watch my son laugh and, try to fight his way out of a situation, I remember just the epiphany that said, this is God giving us something. It really makes me want to cry because I'm so grateful. It's something that we couldn't go back and do differently. My husband was a very hard worker. He was doing his job, and the fact that it meant he had to leave his family behind, and we had to work on building the family structure, just mom and the 4 kids, that was hard. But our firstborn, he might have felt it the hardest, because you do need your dad in times, and I couldn't be that person. So God giving us an opportunity for a restored relationship was something that I recognized in this season that we were in, where my son was home. And to this day, he will say that his dad is the man he admires the most. And the fact that they have had many opportunities to work alongside each other and to understand each other as grown men, it's been a huge, important thing for my husband as well, as the dad, to really engage in a way that life hadn't allowed for up until then. And then in the case of my son and me, as his mom, I made a lot of mistakes, and I had been working to heal those disconnects throughout his life. But the time that he came home, I think it helped to really just tie up all the loose ends. And God helped us in healing, in just completely opening our hearts towards one another once again. I don't know that I ever had my heart closed, but as my firstborn, and when he was dealing with me being the volatile mother that I was in my young years, he had things that really continued to, I think, burden him. We don't realize it, right? I had the same thing with my dad, that kind of trickled down to me, and so therefore it had trickled down to my son. So I've talked about that in my video on getting unstuck from pain and regret. But the general story, from him and me, it was just an opportunity to finally clear the air. And I really believe that God helped us to heal the generational wound of, like I said, my dad to me and then me to my son. And it allowed for us to become deeper and closer with each other and connect as adult to adult. And so there are many, many opportunities we don't even know are within this season of our adult child coming home. I encourage you to maintain an open mind and an open heart in that period of time, and to just know that you will be so amazed at what is transforming and what needs to fall away. I think we just need to stay willing to allow for anything to fall away, and be willing to humble ourselves enough to say, hey, I've made mistakes in the past, or to be strong enough to say, hey, you won't behave that way toward me anymore. If you have an issue with me, let's work through it on the surface instead of all these things that you do that hurt me. So from your child to you, as well as from you to your child, there's growth potential, and in all the aspects of wanting to parent faithfully, this is something that sometimes we need reminders about. So I just want to remind you that that's all in potential, and truly what we are seeking for ourselves within the relationship with our adult children, as well as for ourselves with God, as well as our child with God. We're seeking for that sense of balance, for that sense of equilibrium, and we're seeking for a fuller experience of relating with each other and relating this way. And so looking for those opportunities and having faith that they are there, and just being amazed at how those unfold. That's going to be your story, and you will start to see how that season of life where your adult child is at home is so much a blessing and an opportunity to really create a new platform and go forward from there. And so if we can wrap things up now, we talked about cultivating a growth mindset and a growth perspective to just build a narrative that always sees that there's opportunities here. We're growing, we're learning, we are adjusting and becoming more of what we want to be in relationship and as our individual selves. And we've talked about the opportunities for healing and for restoring relationship, renewing relationship, and redefining relationship. And all of those things are important. We know how it was when we were trying to relate to our parents, and they still treated us like we were living at home and we were kids, right? It's a transition. And so having that opportunity to be more intentional in a situation like having your child come home to live with you, hey, that's an opportunity that you don't want to miss. You want to try to really be mindfully engaging with it, right? And so now I just want to encourage you that in this season, try to just see living arrangements as healing opportunities. It's not a failure. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about your child coming home to live with you. Set your parameters with you and your partner. Figure out how to lead the situation and build the communication, the balance, the boundaries. Build it as you and your partner helping your child, and then also encourage them to build their sense of balance and boundaries and communication. And if necessary, have the difficult conversations. Step into times like that. If you have set some ground rules and some parameters, and you've felt that you are supported in what you're trying to accomplish, supported by God, supported by your spouse, and you know where you're trying to head in taking full advantage of this experience, then if you have difficult conversations, then it's to clear the air. It's to kind of get through the weeds and find the openness, that open field that you want to step into. And there might be pushback, between you and your adult child, but this is just everything settling back into a new normal. And so hold yourself steady and know that you're grounded in the principles that you are upholding, and that your child is wanting to be within the safety and the protection of that. So trust the divine process. Amazingly, that is what I have seen in our experience, that there was so much at work, so much going on within that experience. And the idea of, your child being able to go from survival mode, whatever they were in, to finding a reset, isn't that what the balanced journey of life is all about? It's about finding your sense of center again. And so if we can do that as parents, if we can provide that environment, and if we have some of these perspectives to bring forward in the experience, then I think that the success story of the time that my child came back and lived with us is going to be something that you will tell with the wisdom that you gained and with the discernment that you have about the experience and what it really cultivated in all of you, the people that were involved in that experience. And so now I just want to encourage you to comment below about what you are dealing with in terms of your child moving back home, and what is the biggest challenge that you're facing. I just hope that you will share your thoughts, and that if there's any takeaways that you really gained from this video, that you'll let us know what you think is your next step and what you're going to really focus on next. And I just want to encourage you to keep going. You're doing a great job, and I hope that you will see the greatest blessings in your child moving back home and you having this opportunity together. So I'll talk to you in the next video. You be well until the next time.